So welcome to Buddhist View podcast. Thank you very much for watching, and I am very pleased to be here with Daniel McNamara, one of my teachers from Rangjung Yeshe. So Daniel's particular recent research, or maybe not so recent, I guess, because recently has been the relationship between Kalachakra and Muslim connection in Islam.
Yep.
But before that, I understand you were more involved with Ratnākaraśānti. So
Excuse me.
I'm feeling very happy that I have to have this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about Ratnākaraśānti. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, Ratnākaraśānti is an abiding interest of mine. I wrote my PhD about him. I have 2 articles in publication right now that are from my PhD, so he's still very much an active piece of what I do. Otherwise, I primarily teach in the TTIP, the Translation, Textual Interpretation, and Philology program at RYI. But I do get the chance to teach philosophy sometimes. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And thank you also for hosting us. We're in the vicinity of Bodha Stupa in Daniel's place right now, so it's a really beautiful room, really beautiful shrine room.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it feels like a good space.
Yeah. So maybe you can tell us a little bit who is Ratnākaraśānti.
He's Tibetan history is peppered with figures that are just not well known, that are much more influential than they get credit for, basically. And he is one of those. So Ratnākaraśānti was, by all accounts, the most senior professor at Vikramasila Monastery in the late 900s, probably more the early 1000s. He was one of Atisha's main teachers. He also taught Drokmi Lotsawa. It's possible he taught Maitrīpa, but we'll talk about that a little later. So he taught many very major figures in the transmission of Buddhism into Tibet. And he was also, of course, very influential at Vikramasila as well. He received the title the Omniscient One in the Age of Kali, which is a pretty distinguished kind of idea. And one thing that's very interesting about him is he integrates Mahāyāna thought, especially Yogācārin and Pramana, with Tantric exegesis. So he talks about philosophy in his Tantric commentaries. Doesn't really talk about Tantra in his philosophy, but you can see that they're very strongly integrated. Yeah.
This is the time also when Buddhist monastic scholasticism was taking Tantric ideas into their philosophical tenet systems, correct?
Yeah, that started a little bit earlier. That was definitely happening by the 900s. Catherine would be able to give more detailed, more precise details. But that had been going on. Philosophical elements, for example, of the Shakrasamvara Tantra were being highlighted, and the commentaries were becoming more philosophical. But Ratnākaraśānti does represent a period at which sort of the very well-trained scholars were spending time on pramana and also writing sadhanas and writing tantric commentaries. So it really is kind of the full flowering of something that had been going on for about a century.
So from that perspective, what is unique about Ratnākara's view, philosophical synthesis, or what makes him stand out versus others of his contemporaries?
Yeah, great. So in the Tibetan doxographical tradition, the Siddhanta or the Dripta tradition, he's labeled as a Nirākāra Yogacara or a Namdzumpe Nazuchipa, right? Which means that he believes that, based in the Madhyantavibhāga, I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but primarily based in the Madhyantavibhāga, he believes that all phenomenal experience, including the experience of space and time, are karmically conditioned. And so any kind of cognition that's not just pure awareness without any shape or color, is karmically conditioned. And so there is a pramana for him. There is a valid direct perception, I should say, a pratyaksha pramana, right? Rangonsum kitsema, and that is the unadulterated perception of luminosity, of usa, or of prakasha in Sanskrit, which is very closely linked to rangrek, to svasamvedana, right? So that's his main kind of contribution. His main contempt is sort of, he had a little bit of a philosophical rivalry with another professor at Vikramashila called Jñānasrīmitra, who took the view that, well, if there's, we're Buddhist, there has to be something it's like to be a Buddha. Even if we can't conceive of it, there has to be something that it's like. And his reasoning went, well, cognition has to have content or else it's not cognition. And you, Ratnākaraśānti, if you say that there's a cognition without any content, you're basically saying that Buddhas don't experience anything. And so Buddhas either don't exist, or, as they say, being a Buddha is sort of like being whacked on the head and just kind of blanked out. Jñānasrīmitra has a very sophisticated theory called Vichitra Advaita, which is kind of non-dual, manifold phenomenal experience. So he held, a little tricky, he held the idea that a Buddha had cognition, that the Buddha saw things, there's something it's like to be a Buddha, but that he did it in a non-dual way. I'd like to give a shout out to my good friend Davey Tomlinson, who wrote his PhD on the debate that these two had with each other. So I'd recommend that to anybody interested in this topic.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds, maybe because of my lack of understanding, it sounds similar to the idea of nirvana in the early Buddhism tradition, that there's also similar discussion that nirvana is an exhaustion and the Buddhas kind of sort of disappear. Right. Would you see any similarity with that idea?
I mean, there are similarities, but they're definitely not the same, because nirvana means blow out, right? When you blow out a candle, where does the flame go? It's sort of a strange question. It's just gone. So Ratnākara had a very sophisticated theory of Buddhahood. He generally held 3 Buddha bodies instead of 4 or 5, which many of his contemporaries held. So no Vajrakāya, no Svabhavakāya, that sort of thing. Karasa. So he did maintain that Buddhas could continue to act in the world. And so he had very much a Mahāyāna view of enlightenment. It's just that a Buddha's cognition kind of, for the Buddha themselves, so to speak, is nothing but light. Because Buddhas see the truth, and the truth is that the only thing that could exist is just awareness. So I would say I understand the similarities to nirvana, but there's also some similarities to Dzogchen, for example, where it's kind of the mind spontaneously producing images coming out of the sort of some basic purity, right? He didn't think that images were coming out of the purity, but there is this basic pure experience for him. I don't want to make it sound like they're too similar. They're not. But it is worth noting that Ratnākaraśānti is generally considered to be one of the main influences from India on the development of Zhentong. Specifically, Ratnākaraśānti has a interpretation of the other dependent nature. Right? There's the imputed nature, the other dependent, and the perfected. A scholar named Hong Lo has argued that Ratnākaraśānti's explanation of the other dependent gives us the Sanskrit for Zhentong.
Oh, wow.
That Paratantra is empty of other, basically. Yeah.
Can you briefly describe how Ratnākaraśānti's view holds the 3 natures, or how he interprets them?
Yeah. So this is my reconstruction. Other Ratnākaraśānti scholars might think a little differently, but it's he does follow, one reading, his reading of the Raṇgjung, right? But basically, the imputed nature is how we ordinarily conceive of the world. There's a me, there's a you, there's stuff, and then there's a karmically conditioned other dependent dependent origination is happening, and it's sort of the basis upon which we're imputing me and you truly existent selves and so forth, right? And that's other dependence has two forms, a pure form and an impure form. Now here's where he deviates a little bit from the Mahāyāna, I think. The big difference for him is he adds the idea of prakasha, of luminosity, which is not found in the Mahāyāna. So basically, the pure aspect of the other dependent nature is luminosity. But then that luminosity, there's another element, which is karmic conditioning, right? Which is the vasanas, or the pakchak, which leads to a cognitive model where when we look around the room, we are actually seeing something real. It's just not any of this color and shape and stuff. We're seeing luminosity. And because of our karma, luminosity appears as if it's, the brown chair and, and so forth, right? And so...
So this is the impure dependent, the one that you just described, or this is also the pure?
So sorry, thank you. The dependent nature is sort of at the same time, there's a pure and an impure aspect. Because luminosity is always present. If luminosity weren't present, then we wouldn't have cognition. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So the impure dependent nature is when luminosity, because of karma, appears, like shapes and colors and internal and external and so forth, right? So the impure is kind of the mixing in of impurities with the pure, but they're not really different things. Whereas according to Maitreya Sangha Vasubandhu, the pure dependent nature, you only really talk about that after the revolution at the basis, after Ashraya Paravriti, after the fundamental transformation into Buddhahood, right? So that's a difference. I should note, I've been talking about this a little bit at conferences, but I've gotten a little bit of pushback on it. But this is something I'm publishing about right now. So, as I said, not everybody might agree with me, but this is my reading of what's happening. And so, so the perfected nature then would be kind of seeing reality the way it is, seeing the dependent the way that it is, right? So he ascribes to the kind of model where the dependent nature is happening. Seeing it the wrong way is the imputed. Seeing it the right way is the perfected. So seeing it the right way is going to be an experience of luminosity and meditative equipoise. And then the experience of Buddha after the karma is all gone. There's no reason for colors and shapes to appear, and luminosity fully kind of appears as it is.
And also he has this idea that in order for Buddhas to operate in the world, they need to keep...
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit on that?
Yeah, it's very interesting. In one of his texts, the instructions on the ornament of the middle way, the Madhyamaka Alankarupadesha, or the Umagenki Mengak, he says that Buddhas intentionally hold on to a tiny bit of karma because that is how Buddhas can act in the world, right? The idea that a Buddha has no karma, is not bound by samsara, and yet can act in the world is a very difficult problem, right? So Tsongkhapa, for example, answers this question by saying basically that in accumulating merit and wisdom, a bodhisattva sets up the means for a Buddha to be a kind of perpetual motion machine of action. Sometimes we call that robo-Buddha. That's what John Donne calls it, or the Buddha is a compassion machine. So the Buddha is acting but not really doing anything. The Buddha's in the Dharmakaya, but still kind of part of a process, right? Ratnākaraśānti in this text, at least, takes a different tack, which is, that the Buddha intentionally holds on to a little karma, which might, you might naturally say, wait, but that means he's not a Buddha. the way I think about that, the way I explain it to myself at least, is the metaphor of a patient parent. Imagine a parent is playing with the child, and the child wants to play pretend. And so the parent is kind of acting like they're on a pirate ship, or acting like they're in a princess in a castle or something like that, right? The parent is never lost in the fantasy, right? And the parent isn't worried, acting as though there's all of this stuff for the benefit of the child, right? So the parent is acting compassionately as if they believe that there's a castle or a pirate ship. But the idea that they would suddenly sort of fall out of compassion or fall out of awareness that none of that is real, it doesn't really make sense. Yeah.
I see. Another interesting thing I read in Ratnākaraśānti's, I think in the maybe Prasna Paramita Upadesha, he speaks about Gotra.
Oh yeah.
Is that does he interpret this as ultimate, or is this a relative?
Right.
What's your view on this?
So yeah, you're asking good questions. I'm trying to not be too complicated. If I go on too long, let me know.
No, maybe please briefly you can explain what is the Gotra classification.
Yes, of course. Okay, so for Ratnākaraśānti, the important Gotras, there may be another. I don't know if he accepted the Śāntaraka Gotra or not. That's a sort of separate thing that developed in China. But basically, the Gotras are the way a Buddhist will attain enlightenment. So there's the Śravakayana Gotra, the path of the vehicle of hearers. There's the Bodhisattva Gotra, the path of Bodhisattvas, and then there's the path of the Pratyeka Buddhas. Now, Ratnākaraśānti lived kind of at the last point in Indic intellectual life before the sublime continuum, the Uttar Tantra or the Gyu Lama, came into, became popular, right? It was his probably near contemporary Maitrīpada, who is, that's who we think is responsible for that. And that text marks a shift from accepting three types of enlightenment being real to the notion of ekayana, to the notion that Buddhahood is actually the only one. Now, there are, of course, earlier texts that say that, the Lotus Sutra, for example. But in terms of how Indic intellectual life was happening, that was the shift. And so Ratnākaraśānti seems to have really thought that you could become an arhat and a Pratyeka Buddha. And he's one of the last major intellectuals in India to hold that view. Now, so as a side note, what got me interested in Ratnākaraśānti is his Yogācāra, his emphasis on luminosity and self-awareness, and his the fact that he's looking at both Tantra and Yogācāra, right, specifically. But I got confused, and my dissertation is basically me trying to make sense of how he's using categories like Madhyamaka and Yogācāra. This is another category that he honestly just uses the word differently than we're used to, right? Not only as in thinking that Buddhahood is the only real enlightenment, but also some other Gotra theorists will say, well, just as in Vajrayana, people are kind of naturally part of one of the different families because of their dispositions, that you don't do anything to be, you take a vow and things, but your basic constitution is to be headed toward full enlightenment or headed toward arhatship. He does not think, people aren't born into the Bodhisattva Gotra, the Bodhisattva path, right? They enter into that path when they take the vows, and they can slide back into and become an arhat. So someone on the Bodhisattva Gotra, if they don't do it right, they could theoretically, kind of accidentally become an arhat. This was a little bit more common of an idea than we think, especially in like kind of 700s, 800s, 900s, right? And he still kind of adopts that view. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's the common interpretation. This is based on the Mahāyāna Sutra Laṅkāra, I guess.
Probably.
The idea of the 5 Gotras. So that's the common interpretation. That's also how I thought of it. It's it makes sense that it's a flexible thing based on our particular karmic propensities in that lifetime.
Right.
Okay.
And I do think that the notion of bodhisattva jnana being kind of more natural is tied up with the notion that the bodhisattva style of enlightenment is the only real enlightenment. Personally, I think those are kind of mixed in. I think they're tied together, but that's kind of my own speculation.
And this is like you mentioned, Ratnagotravibhāga's arrival, because I guess then everything becomes more oriented towards Buddha nature. And I guess, especially, I'm just assuming, maybe you can correct me, the idea of Buddha nature and Tantric practice seem very, very harmonious, right?
Oh, yeah.
So before these Tantric practitioners adopted Buddha nature, they were relying more on the Yogacara approach, of similar to what Ratnākaraśānti was doing, I
okay.
imagine.
Yeah, let me unpack that a little bit historically. So the story goes, we don't have any counter evidence. What we don't know is that Maitrīpada recovered the Gyu Lama, the Uttara Tantra, from a stupa. And then apparently he made his way up to Kashmir. And the text became very important in a family, the kind of main figure of which is a guy named Sajjana. Right? Sajjana was a Goya Samaja practitioner also. I think he was Hevajra as well, but he was definitely a Goya Samaja practitioner. So the Goya Samaja Tantra and the Uttara Tantra were being practiced at the same time by the same Kashmiri teachers. And they both made their way into Tibet at the same time, and they were being translated by the same people, right? So this is where Ngok Lotsawa goes to Kashmir, studies with Sajjana, receives both of the texts, and establishes what's called the Sangpu tradition, sort of the intellectual engagement of Buddha nature. I'm drawing on Klaus-Dieter Mattes's excellent book, Direct Path to the Buddha Within. Here. Exactly, yeah, Golotsawa Shunpa, yeah. And then a different person named Senkawoche studied with Sajjana, received those books, interpreted them in a slightly different way. You can look at Klaus's book for details about that, and establish what's called the meditation lineage of Buddha nature, where Buddha nature and the Uttara Tantra are very linked with Mahamudra, right? And according to some interpretations, Sutra Mahamudra just is the Uttara Tantra, right? And so those historical facts kind of, I think that has had a huge effect on how Tibetans received both Buddha nature theory and some of these very important tantric practices, such as Goya Samaja, right? Where Ratnākaraśānti, he doesn't engage Buddha nature that way, because he's not living in a world where the Uttara Tantra is being discussed, right? He's just sort of doing something slightly different, right? But I do think he's the last generation, and maybe the last thinker before that shift happens.
So you mentioned, since you mentioned Maitrīpa, so there's no evidence that Ratnākaraśānti was his guru?
Right. So some Tibetan historians, say that he was. Harunaga Isaacson and Francesco Sfera, I think it was Sfera, wrote a giant book on the Yogacara Bhumi. They edited a giant volume on the Yogacara Bhumi, and in their introduction, they look at the evidence that Maitrīpa would have been a student of Ratnākaraśānti, and they think it's not the case. They argue that Ratnākaraśānti was so famous that, he's the kind of person that people would say that they studied with, right? The way that in that same time period, we know that texts were, appearing in the world that were being attributed to Vasubandhu and to Nagarjuna. So there is a sort of culture of kind of associating people or texts with, very famous names, right? So there's at least reason to give pause there. In my opinion, in my understanding, the other reason to think that maybe he didn't study with him is he doesn't mention him really. He doesn't. He criticizes him. Maitrīpa criticizes Ratnākaraśānti maybe a little bit in his Tattva Ratnavali, his jewel garlands, where he talks about the potential faults of the views and meditations of non-Madhyamaka schools, right? But he doesn't cite them. Not really evidence either way. But also, maybe your listeners are familiar with the story that Maitrīpa and Ratnākaraśānti had a debate, and Maitrīpa upheld upheld Madhyamaka and defeated Ratnākaraśānti. And Ratnākaraśānti was very proud, and he threw down his monk's robes, and he left in a huff. So what that story is doing is basically taking Madhyamaka ideas about what Yogacaras are like. That goes back to Bhavaveka. Bhavaveka accused Yogacaras of being overly proud and attached to their own views. And so Ratnākaraśānti becomes sort of the poster boy, if you will, of what's wrong with Yogacara. And he's very arrogant and so forth. So it's a little bit of a caricature, but that story does not appear to come earlier than the time of Pema Karpo, who I forget exactly his dates, but it was like 1500s,
1500s, I think.
Yeah. So he doesn't really, the association between them. There's not a lot of evidence for it textually before around 1500, right? So, for example, the Lives of the 84 Siddhas, which is not a, we can't look at it as like rigorous history, but it's a testament from like the 1300s. Doesn't make that association, right? Maybe they just left it out, but yeah.
Him as Shantipa in there, right?
He's one of the Mahasiddhas. Shantideva, I think also, he's either the only or one of the only Mahasiddhas who remained a monk for his entire life. He never left the monastery and had, adventures in the forest, kind of thing. Yeah. But he's considered to be a Mahasiddha.
And following this line of thought, would you categorize Ratnākaraśānti as a Yogācārin?
I was thinking about how to answer that because, that, as I said, my dissertation was sort of trying to figure out why Ratnākaraśānti doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense according to our categories because he's using these words differently. So if, when you ask that, you mean among the four Siddhantas, he would say, okay, there's two ways of being Mahāyāna. One is Yogacara, one is Madhyamaka, and I'm Yogacara, and Madhyamakas are my Mahāyāna opponents. He doesn't say anything like that. He acknowledges the distinction in order to collapse the distinction. In Ratnākaraśānti's view, there is one correct Mahāyāna, and there's incorrect Mahāyāna. And Nagarjuna and probably Aryadeva realize the correct Mahāyāna, and their followers, who call themselves Madhyamakas, they don't get Nagarjuna right. He calls them pseudo-Madhyamakas, or umetarnang, right? Madhyamaka Bhasa. So there's not Madhyamaka versus Yogacara, there's correct Mahāyāna and incorrect Mahāyāna. So he talks about types of Yogacara and Madhyamaka. So in his philosophical works, he never identifies with either Yogacara or Madhyamaka when he's talking about them. He talks about both of them as having faults, and then he considers his own view to be different. And likewise, one of his contemporaries or near contemporaries, a guy named Ratnagokravibhāga, talks about Ratnākaraśānti's philosophy, but he talks about Yogacara, and then Ratnākaraśānti, and then Madhyamaka. So one of his contemporaries treats him as sort of a little bit of an exception. As I mentioned, Ratnākaraśānti talks about philosophy in his Tantric commentaries. He wrote several of them, but his two biggest are on Hevajra and Goya Samaja. In his commentary on Goya Samaja, chapter 2, specifically chapter 2, verse 2, which is a very influential verse, he goes on a long digression about philosophy, and he explains his own view of luminosity being the only pramana, and colors and shapes being kind of the product of karma. At the end of that, he says, this is the Yogacara view. This is also the view of Nagarjuna. anyone who disagrees with it does not have a faultless view. So, yeah, in that case, we call him a Yogacara. In terms of how we think of him, he's definitely a Yogacara, but it's a trickier question than it sounds, because it's kind of insisting on a distinction that he feels is wrong.
Which I would further argue, that's how Asanga and Vasubandhu saw themselves as well, right?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, just Mahāyānas.
In my dissertation, I actually argue that even Paramartha doesn't. Paramartha sort of seems to be the person who. Wait, am I thinking? Paramartha's the Chinese translator. Why am I?
Dharmapala?
Dharmapala. Yes, thank you. Sorry, Dharmapala. Just brain fart. Let's start that again. So Dharmapala, according to the stories, Dharmapala is the one that kind of gave Bhavaveka all these ideas that Yogacaras, think they're better than everybody else, and so forth. But Bhavaveka challenges Dharmapala to a debate, and Dharmapala says, "We don't have time for this. Sentient beings live impermanent lives, and phenomena are like a water bubble. I'm not going to debate you." But studies of Dharmapala often insert a kind of insistence on a Yogacara Madhyamaka divide that, in my, very small readings of Dharmapala, simply isn't there. So I argue in my dissertation against that idea. So Bhavaveka definitely thought there was a Yogacara Madhyamaka distinction. As you say, Asanga, Vasubandhu, Stiramati, there's good reason to believe that they didn't. So, for example, Stiramati has a commentary on the root versus the middle way. At least it's attributed to him. It's in Chinese. It's a complete mess from what I hear. But Dan Lusthaus notes that, early Yogacaras don't criticize Nagarjuna. They think that Nagarjuna was right. They think that they're right too. If I can expand just for a tiny bit more. One way that Ratnākaraśānti defends this notion is looking at the Saṃdhinirmocanasūtra, right? The sutra unraveling the thought is one way to translate that, or untying the knots. Talks about the three turnings and says, okay, the first turning taught selflessness, that's fine. But the content of the second and the third turning is exactly the same. The wording is almost exactly the same. There's really one major difference between this sutra's description of the second turning and the third turning, and that's that the third turning is more clear. So the third turning, the sutra, explains itself as, not different from the Perfection of Wisdom sutras. It's just saying it in a way that's not so prone to misinterpretation. And Ratnākaraśānti explicitly mentions that, and he sort of applies that logic to Nagarjuna and Maitreya, and says, well, they're both bodhisattvas. Of course, they have the same view. What's the difference? Maitreya is just a little bit more clear. So he believes that he agrees with Nagarjuna. One of his more interesting claims is he believes Nagarjuna accepts the three natures.
Yeah. From the 60 verses, I think, right?
He mainly there's two verses in the 60 stanzas on reasoning. 21 and 32, and that he's constantly citing as evidence for this. Yeah.
Can you briefly mention what these two are? These stanzas.
Well, so the 60 verses is considered to be, Jan Westerhoff calls it Nagarjuna's most Yogacara writing. So it is where someone would look. Particularly of those two, verse 32 is the more important. And there's a few ways of reading it. Ratnākaraśānti's way of reading it is a little bit unique relative to what we have available, right? So we have to be careful here. You might say, oh, well, Ratnākaraśānti is just making something up, insisting on his reading. No, not necessarily. We don't know whether other people were saying the same things, whether there's lineages we don't know about. But basically, there's a the features of the two lines are normally read as this dissolves, like the elements are contained within consciousness. The five great elements, water, earth, and so forth, are contained in consciousness, and I forget exactly how the other way reads it, but it's like there's the dissolution of ignorance when there's realization, right? And it's this jnāne. So there's a Sanskrit compound, tat jnāne. So like in realization, this disappears. Ratnākaraśānti reads this as saying, no. Nagarjuna believes that the five elements are contained within awareness, and that he explicitly says it in this compound. In awareness, they are there. Their source is consciousness, right? So he does read it certainly very differently from Candrakīrti, but he gives an interpretation that is viable in Sanskrit. It's just, it's so different from what we think that it's hard to wrap our heads around. But he does read it as saying, no, look, this is proof that Nagarjuna thought that external reality was unreal, and that awareness is sort of more real than material. Yeah.
Does this fall? I understand that Nagarjuna's texts are classified into three categories.
Right.
Is this part of the collection of reasonings?
It is.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So, some people look at the Tutsok, the Stava collection, and say, okay, well, looks like there's some Yogacara elements there, but he's kind of doing something different there, and he's talking about Buddhahood as a positive experience. I don't know. I think I'm biased, but it's sort of, one side accuses the other side of being biased, and that side says, no, you're the ones who are biased. It's like there's a little bit of that going on, but no, it is. It's not just within the stanzas of reasoning. It's one of the texts that seems to be most closely tied to the root versus the middle way.
I'm going to now rephrase my question just for fun.
Sure.
So, say we take Yogācāra and Madhyamaka as more or less as we understand them in the Kshetras nowadays, the Tibetan Kshetras. From that understanding of these two systems, if we look at Ratnākaraśānti, how much of his tantric exegesis and practice is drawing from Yogācāra versus Madhyamaka, would you say? How much, which one has the most influence in his tantric?
Oh, definitely Yogācāra. Definitely Yogācāra, but he relies heavily on the Laṅkāvatārā. He cites that quite a lot. He doesn't rely on the Dharmadharmatavibhāga, which is interesting, which strengthens the case that we all basically agree on as scholars, that the Uttara Tantra and the Dharmadharmatavibhāga, right, the distinguishing dharma from the nature of dharmas, basically, they appeared in India, in sort of intellectual India, a little bit later, right? He does cite and really rely heavily on a text called the Avikalpapraveśadhāraṇī, sometimes called the Nirākāra, which is very closely tied to the Dharmadharmatavibhāga, and which gives... The Laṅkāvatārā does this as well, but this text entering, the Dharani on entering into non-conceptuality, it gives a set of 4 stages of yoga. And so Ratnākaraśānti expands on that a lot. Very interestingly, in one of his tantric sadhanas, at the points, in many, especially later sadhanas, there's, you chant some kind of mantra or dharani, right, about emptiness and purity of phenomena, and then dissolve into emptiness, and then sort of start generation stage practice from there. His sadhana, at that moment of dissolution into emptiness, says, now perform the 4 stages of yoga. So he's very clear about how he thinks Yogācāra, as we're using the word, is the underpinning for tantric practice. I'd say again, I mentioned another work by Davy Tomlinson. He has a great article called The Tantric Context of Yogačāra's Philosophy, the Tantric Context of Ratnākaraśānti's Philosophy of Mind, in which he argues, I think rightly, that not only is Ratnākaraśānti talking about philosophy in the Tantras, you can't really understand his philosophy if you don't understand that he's being informed by tantric practice and by tantric engagements with things like the four joys and things like that. His theory of luminosity is very much of a piece with his theory of advanced yogic practices.
Are the four yogas mentioned in the dharani of entering into non-conceptuality, and the four yogas mentioned in the Dharma-Dharmatavibhāga, and the four yogas mentioned in the Laṅkāvatārasūtra?
Right.
Can we say they are the same?
That's a really good question. In order to answer that question, I would really want to just be like looking directly at all of them, basically. I think that there are little differences. But what I will say is Ratnākaraśānti, again, doesn't use the Dharma-Dharmatavibhāga, but when he's talking about the four yogas in different texts, which he mentions them in almost all of his texts, having to do with like tantric commentary and philosophy, he cites both of those texts, not necessarily together, but it doesn't look like he thinks there's a difference. Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about this text, Avikalpapraveśadhāraṇī, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would yield to Dion for that, but it's it's a text that we would identify as Yogacara that does kind of identify the relationship between phenomena and the nature of phenomena.
Do we know who composed it or where it came from? Do you have
somebody might. I don't. I mean, it's a dharani, so it's kind of considered to be authorless. And it's clearly very related to the Dharma-Dharmatavibhāga, but I don't know if we figured out exactly what the provenance of that relation is. We do know that it was being cited before the Dharma-Dharmatavibhāga seems to have been available. Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's been a while since I looked at it out, honestly. I don't want to mislead your viewers. So
I'd say like that Ratnākaraśānti's background also entails, you talk a little bit about this in this lecture that you gave in Rangjung Yeshe a couple of years ago. His criticism towards the Umagyen.
Yeah, right.
Maybe you can mention a little bit what he's criticizing. Particularly, I remember you mentioned he's criticizing the relative truth.
Right. So you mentioned a synthesis, and that's definitely understandable. A lot of people who write about this, great people, Rueg, Brunholzl, talk about his thought as a synthesis that's different from what Śāntarakṣita was doing in his Ornament of the Middle Way, Madhyamaka Alankara, again. It's actually not what's happening. What's happening is that I think, Ratnākaraśānti's thought is very close to Śāntarakṣita's thought in terms of, if you just look at the broad strokes, it looks like a synthesis. Because he does say things like Madhyamaka and Yogacara, come to the same view, they agree.
Is it Śāntarakṣita or Ratnākaraśānti?
Sorry. Let me. I was setting it up a little different. Right. So Ratnākaraśānti says in many places, the view of Nagarjuna and the view of Yogacara are sadirshya. They're tumba. They agree. And so people would be forgiven, would understandably think, that means that he's doing something like Śāntarakṣita, who says, well, you use Yogacara for the conventional, Madhyamaka for the ultimate. Ratnākaraśānti is doing something a little different, but people have thought, he's doing kind of the same thing. But he's not. When Ratnākaraśānti says these two systems agree, again, it's what he means is Nagarjuna agrees with the Mahāyāna view, and the Mahāyāna view is the Yogacara view, and a lot of people, specifically those we call Madhyamakas, misunderstand it. So I think, notice the similarity of names, right? The Madhyamaka Laṅkāra, Śāntarakṣita wrote his own commentary on that. His Rangjung, Kamalashila wrote a Kadrel or a Punjika on it. So Ratnākaraśānti wrote a text with the same name, which criticizes Madhyamakas and establishes his view. I focused on the criticism of Madhyamaka. The only opponent he really explicitly cites is Śāntarakṣita, and specifically the Ornament of the Middle Way, and specifically verse 64, which lays out how the conventional truth is supposed to work. So I'll explain that in a second, but I think he did that because Śāntarakṣita came so close to being right that he really could lead people astray, that people could get very confused, right? This is speaking, from what I think Ratnākaraśānti's perspective was. He singles him out because if somebody's view is similar enough to yours that people would say, oh, you guys are saying the same thing, but if you're a scholar who wants to say, no, this person is really not, there's problems, I think there's an urgency there. And he goes about explaining that in several different ways. Mahāyāna scripture, the fact that Maitreya is higher on the bodhisattva path than Nagarjuna.
Which level is each one of them?
Nagarjuna is nobody disputes this, interestingly. The Laṅkāvatārā says Nagarjuna is on the first level, at least. I mean, it says, Naga, and we think it's Nagarjuna. And Maitreya, of course, is at the highest, and Asanga is on the third level. So just as a side note, one of the opening arguments of the text that I did my dissertation on is that. It says, well, Maitreya's as close to being a Buddha as you can get. And Asanga is on the third bhumi. Nagarjuna is on the first. So if you're going to trust one of those, why would it be Nagarjuna, basically? Like if you choose to make camps, if you have to say they don't agree. He says they all agree. But sorry if I'm getting a little far away. But so here, Śāntarakṣita's view in verse 64 is the conventional truth has three aspects, right? Causal efficacy. Something has to be able to, perform causes in the world. It has to arise and cease. And it has to be this interesting phrase, satisfactory so long as one doesn't analyze it too hard. So Śāntarakṣita, very briefly speaking, convention. So this cup, the cup arises and ceases. My idea of the cup doesn't, but that's a separate conversation. It can hold water. It has the capacity to hold water. It's a rose. It's going to cease as an entity. It's arising and ceasing every moment. Okay, it's satisfactory without, as long as you don't look too hard. How does that make sense? What would that mean? Basically, if you look at it and its conventional truth, and you start to analyze it into its parts, if you start to analyze it, you very quickly start analyzing it from the ultimate perspective. But if you're going to, if your point is to establish the conventional truth of this, you don't want to analyze it from the ultimate perspective. You've gotten your two truths a little mixed up, right? That seems to be basically what Śāntarakṣita, something like what he was trying to do there, in my estimation. Ratnākaraśānti I almost hear him laughing. So let me get this straight. You're going to prove conventional truth, and conventional truths are only true if you don't do philosophical investigation. So you're doing a philosophical investigation that says don't think about it too much. Are you kidding? So that's one way that he attacks. The more devastating attack, honestly, and in my opinion, and in some of my colleagues' opinions, is Śāntarakṣita is very concerned to prove that Madhyamakas have valid cognition. There's a pramana. Pramanas are about certainty. So the idea of engaging in pramana specifically and saying, yeah, but don't look too hard, is like saying, I have pramana, I have a theory of certainty, and part of my theory of certainty is don't try to find certainty. Just sit with the uncertainty. Yeah. And then there's a third I think pretty devastating thesis against Śāntarakṣita, which is, okay, conventional truths are empty. This is, okay, Śāntarakṣita, let me get this straight. Conventional truths, things are efficacious, but they're empty. And if they're empty, then they're false. They don't have the power that they claim to have, right? So trying to establish a conventional truth that's false is not a truth, right? This is kind of Ratnākaraśānti's view. He basically, steps back and says, well, look, Śāntarakṣita, you claim that you're representing Dharmakirti. You claim that you're representing the kind of tradition of certainty, of clarity, of establishing things as kind of valid perceptions. But you're saying don't look too hard, and you're saying that the thing that's valid, that's certain, is false. So it's like, what are you doing? So it's, obviously I've been influenced by these things. Like he really offers a multi-pronged, pretty devastating attack on what he thinks is wrong with Śāntarakṣita's viewpoint. And he's not doing it, of course, to be mean. He's doing it to clarify what he thinks Nagarjuna's view actually is. So the name of that text, the Madhyamaka Alankaravrti, or the Uma Genki Rangjo, is a commentary that clarifies or ornaments, highlights something that's in there that might not be obvious. Madhyamaka, the Madhyamaka view, and Nagarjuna's text, right? But it's also a commentary that's ornamenting the Madhyamaka Alankara. It's sort of correcting Śāntarakṣita. So he's basically trying to say, okay, this guy came close, but he didn't do it, and so I need to tweak it and just let's just establish what's happening. All of this philosophically, I think, certainly in that text, Ratnākaraśānti's main opponent is Śāntarakṣita. There's the name, there's the citation of the source. You can't really argue against it. But there's an idea that Ratnākaraśānti is kind of like obsessively against Candrakīrti, whom he doesn't cite, whom he does, he indicates positions that are similar to Candrakīrti. But for a lot of reasons, I think the idea that Ratnākaraśānti himself was against Candrakīrti is really tenuous. In other places in his philosophy, again, he attacks positions that look more like Candrakīrti. In particular, he identifies a type of what looks like Madhyamakas that deny pramana. Which Candrakīrti famously, it's one of the sort of keystone points. So I'm not here to argue, people are wrong about the Candrakīrti, but I think that it's clear to me, at least from my text, that he's much more interested in Śāntarakṣita and in critiquing Yogacara Madhyamaka, because it almost gets it right. Whereas someone like Candrakīrti thinks that awareness and material reality are sort of equally merely conventionally true. And so he sort of lumps Candrakīrti in with Bhavaveka, says, okay, well, those people think that conventionally there's external objects, and those people I just don't really take very seriously. This is how I am thinking about this, and I can defend that. There's a lot there, obviously. Yeah.
And what happened? Recently I read in a short article by Dorje Wangchuk, he's saying that there was a decree by the Tibetan king that everybody had to take the Madhyamaka view, uphold the Madhyamaka view. I'm wondering if this is true. Is this one of the reasons that Ratnākaraśānti's view became so looked down upon?
That's interesting.
What happened?
Dorje Wangchuk is a great scholar. I'm sure that he's, I'm sure that he's saying something correct. I'm not familiar with the article, unfortunately, but what I will say is, kind of leaving aside the question of a decree, we get the impression that Madhyamaka was the most important system in India. There's reasons for believing that, Shantideva and so forth. I'm not saying it wasn't, but let me remind us that during Atisha's lifetime, the two most prominent scholars at Vikramashila were both what we call Yogacaras. So at least in that time period, that's not exactly true.
Ratnākaraśānti
And Jñānasrīmitra, this guy who argues this kind of non-dual, variegated experience. But so Śāntarakṣita, establishes monasticism in Tibet. Kamalashila, in traditional Tibetan narratives, Kamalashila wins the Samye debate. And then Atisha kind of is a formative figure in restarting, not the monastic lineage, but restarting the kind of monastic culture in Tibet. So I think this is fair to say, all of the really most influential Indian figures for Tibetans were Madhyamikas. So I mean, it's hopefully this is a good example. I just heard of random hearsay that from aid workers that there are communities in kind of very destitute places in the world that all think that all U.S. people are great, and the reason is the only U.S. people they meet are from NGOs. They're all aid workers. They're all very happy and there to help, right? I think something like that is going on here. It's they weren't exposed to another perspective, and when they were, they already had the tools that of Śāntarakṣita and Shantideva and Atisha. They already had the tools to say, no, we already know that that's wrong. We already know that can't be right. And it's telling that the idea of Yogacara being semtam is telling. This is something I talk about in my dissertation. Tibetan, even the language, is sort of stacked in favor of a Madhyamaka viewpoint. I have a recent article called Unstacking the Deck that's just trying to kind of not show that someone's right or wrong, but kind of show that it's, we're so used to there only being one way to tell the story that we don't understand that the way we tell the story is actually a fundamentally Madhyamaka way to tell the story. Yeah.
Actually, I'm studying Komrim, Bhavanakram right now in Rangjung Yeshe. And just last class, I guess, there's a citation from the Laṅkāvatārā. And
he does the 4 yogas as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was about the yogas. But the Lopan was reading Svatantrika and Prasangika Madhyamaka into the Laṅkāvatārā. Yeah. I thought this is a little bit strange because maybe I've been reading too much Yogacara books. I didn't really see any Madhyamaka there. How do you understand this? Is this just because of their indoctrination, would you say, or is this, how would you?
Right, I meant to say something about this earlier. So the Saṃdhinirmocanasūtra is a third turning text, and so we would call it either Great Madhyamaka or Yogacara or something like that if we're going to do, which is a little bit mixing up apples and oranges, but the Laṅkāvatārasūtra is very much a mixed text. There are passages that lend themselves very obviously to Madhyamaka, others that seem to be speaking more of what we would call Yogacara. So, and it's been used by people that we call Madhyamakas and by Yogacaras in slightly different ways, right? So both Ratnākaraśānti and Kamalashila use the 4 yogas to say, okay, this is how my philosophy shows up in meditation practice. But the way they explain the exact same sources, the exact same source text is a little bit different. And they cite the same scripture. There's not a difference in the wording, at least we don't think, right? It's a kind of separate, other interesting question. It's just Ratnākaraśānti, when so the 4 yogas, very very briefly stated, are recognize that everything that you can experience falls into the Abhidharma categories. So it's okay, there's nothing in the world that's not one of the skandhas, one of the dhatus, something, or like participating in the in those categories. Then based on that, there's an idea of realizing that all of these experiences are mind. That's what mind only means, right?
It's the second yoga, right?
Yeah. And then the third yoga is, okay, well, I know that, phenomenal experience is deceptive. It seems external and it's not. It seems like the cup is real. The cup seems external, but even if I get over it being external, it still looks like a thing. Even if I know that it couldn't be out here, from a Yogacara perspective, even if I know that this isn't external, right? It still looks that way, and it still looks like a real object that it couldn't be. So there's something wrong with the Songwa, right? So with the grahya, with the perceived phenomena. What about the perceiver? If there's something wrong with the perceived, then maybe there's something wrong with the perceiver, and you sort of collapse the grahya, grahaka, or zungzin distinction between grasper and grasped. Sometimes that's misleadingly translated subject and object, but it's more subtle than that. It's more of like a feeling of in here and out there without having to say, oh, object, like not in here, not me, right? And so that collapse leads to non-duality. But then if someone achieves that and holds non-duality, they're still clinging to something. They're still clinging to the reality of non-duality. So they have to get over that, right? So, I don't want to dig into the details, but Ratnākaraśānti can explain that in a way like, okay, karmically conditioned experience, you got to get rid of that, and then you're just left with prakasha that's totally overcome all grasping. Whereas Kamalashila speaks in terms of like, okay, well, what are you left with? You're left with the mere negation, and like the mere negation of even like the subtlest existence, intrinsic existence of non-duality, and then you sort of rest in that and go forward. It's been a while since I looked at some of this material, but that's basically the gist. If you're really interested in this question, Yale Bentor has a very short, very interesting article on the four yogas that really shows just how complicated it is, and how sort of unclear like where the yogas begin and end is. But she lists several ways of explaining the four yogas. It's called the Fourfold Meditation, Outer, Inner, Secret, and Suchness.
I would love to read that.
Yeah, remind me, I'll send you a copy.
Will do.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting.
Oh.
This was actually my next question, I guess, about how the practice, the philosophical position and the understanding of Ratnākaraśānti informs his practice, but I think the four yoga scheme seems to be the...
I believe so.
Right?
Yeah. And in particular, I mean, it's one sadhana, so you could say, well, that's not a smoking gun. Where the sadhana where he says, okay, in order to get into a state where you can start doing generation stage practice, you have to do the fourfold yoga, and that sort of is what you're doing when you're like chanting this, and then everything becomes emptiness. One thing that I think is very interesting about Ratnākaraśānti is he's extremely consistent. Greg Seaton, whose work has really influenced mine a lot, I think that he thinks I get some things wrong, but he's been a big influence on me. I think he thinks that. He identifies some stages in Ratnākaraśānti's work, like some kind of progression. Yeah, I have a different understanding of what that progression is, but anyway, so it's not that Ratnākaraśānti's thought never changed, but he mentions the four yogas. He mentions Laṅkāvatārā, he mentions Dharmakirti, he mentions the Madhyantavibhāga, he mentions Karsa. Let's see, because it's the union of Maitreya, Saṃdhinirmocanasūtra, Pramana theory from Dharmakirti, Karsa. Like he mentions the union of these things in basically all of his texts. And he cites not just the same text, but the same verses, kind of across the board, right? So he cites these verses from the Lanka many, many times. He cites Nagarjuna, the 60 stanzas, 21 and 32, very, very often. I would note that he takes sort of what looks like the most Yogacara verse of Nagarjuna, right? The 60 stanzas, verse 32, and he juxtaposes it with what's really one of the most Yogacara verses in Dharmakirti's Pramanavartika. And then he juxtaposes that with the Laṅkāvatārā, basically trying to make the case. It's like, look, everyone that we look up to, everyone that we rely on, they're all saying the same thing. And I'm saying it too. why are you saying something different? but in any case, I got a little far afield there. But so, so you can't argue, it's like, okay, he mentions the 4 yogas once in a sadhana, but there's so much consistency in how he does things that it's hard to imagine, that's not in the background of his other work.
So of course it's a pleasure for us to dig these ideas textually, and it's very exciting. But I'm also wondering, can we say, is there a living lineage, perhaps Jonangpas, or can we say somebody's claiming to trace their lineage back to Ratnākaraśānti in some way?
I don't think so. It's a great question, but it's a difficult question. So the Sakya Landre tradition, Landre is a little bit wider than Sakya, I would note. There's a couple of different lineages, but the Sakya Landre tradition does rely on 6 kind of commentaries on Hevajra, and Ratnākaraśānti is one of them. The Kagyus tend to be more influenced by Maitrīpada, so it looks similar on the surface, but if you get into the details, it's a little different. Jonang, of course, if Ratnākaraśānti is truly an exemplar, or like a foundational source for the idea, then they're doing stuff that's been influenced by Ratnākaraśānti. However, Ratnākaraśānti's been vilified. He's the arrogant monk. We don't hear about Ratnākaraśānti as being one of Atisha's teachers all that much. Something really interesting happened there, actually. So we think of Ser Lingpa, Dharmakirti Shri is his most common Indian name. We think that he's a Yogācāra, and he's Atisha's famous story. Well, he's a Yogācārin, but he caused bodhicitta to truly, be aroused in my heart, and so he's still, even though he's a Yogācāra, he's still one of my teachers. There's a guy in, I think, Taiwan doing work on what Dharmakirti Shri actually wrote, and Dharmakirti Shri, from his writing, seems to have been very much a Madhyamaka. So we only hear Dharmakirti Shri's name, but we think he's a Yogācāra. So what seems to have happened there is that Ratnākaraśānti got sort of erased. Not completely, but we don't think about him from the lineage. But the idea that Atisha had a teacher who's Yogācāra, who was his teacher, but he disagreed with him philosophically, that stayed on. It just got turned into Dharmakirti Shri. Sakyas will acknowledge the existence of Shantipa's commentary, but not only do they not emphasize it, there was a big debate between Gelugpas and Sakyas, where Gelugpas were criticizing Landre and criticizing Sakya versions of Hevajra for several reasons, but one of them was it's been polluted by Ratnākaraśānti's Yogācāra. So
who said this? Do you know?
Was it K-Drup-J? I believe it was K-Drup-J.
Yeah, it was one of Tsongkhapa's disciples, or during this time period.
Yeah, well, it was Ngorsang Gyatso. So I'm sorry, I'm really not.
It's okay. I was just wondering which time period, more or less.
No, K-Drup. Yeah. Not it's Ngorchen Kungasangpa. So K-Drup-J criticizes the Sakyas partly because their view is adulterated because of the influence of Ratnākaraśānti, and then later on the Sakyas answer back and they debate. So as I said, he's sort of a poster boy for what's wrong with Yogācāra. So he has an influence, but nobody really wants to say he has an influence because his name is associated with criticizing Candrakīrti and upholding a view that in Tibet is just obviously wrong and all of these things. So I don't think anybody would say, yes, we practice this.
It's interesting you mentioned the Sakya lineage, because I heard from Professor Mates also that he was looking for some text in one Sakya library here. He found some text by Dolpopa in the Sakya library, and at that time he was working, I think, with Khenpo Abe, and then he asked Khenpo Abe, why you guys have this text? This is Dolpopa's text, and Khenpo Abe said, what do you mean? He's a Sakyapa,
Yes.
Yeah, I was also surprised.
Yeah. Dopopa studied at Sakya, and he did Lamdre. His first kind of vision, his first enlightened vision, was of Hevajra and the 8 deities. That was before he discovered Kalachakra. But yeah, he institutionally, the Sakyas and the Jonangs have very, very strong history. There's a lot of relation.
Very interesting.
And it's also one of the many kind of twists and turns of this maze is we have the Sakyas readily, explicitly acknowledging, like, yes, Ratnākaraśānti is part of our like collective lineage. Dopopa doesn't mention Ratnākaraśānti. He does cite some of the same sutras, some of the same sections from sutras that Ratnākaraśānti does. Obviously, there's a lot of some kind of like relation between their views. But yeah, Karen Myers once organized a panel with Yaroslav Komorowski, the Shakyamuni scholar, and we were also talking about Dopopa, and it was sort of an open question. It's like, why don't these Shentongpas talk about Ratnākaraśānti? They don't. And yet other people who are not obviously Shentongpas, like the Sakyas, do.
Very interesting, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then just following with this line of thought of the living tradition of Ratnākaraśānti, I also mentioned, I don't know if I asked if you know about this Newar, Buddhist Newar tradition, belief. They have this master who brought some tantric teachings to the Kathmandu Valley, which they call Śāntarakṣita.
Yeah.
And I read somewhere that he might be Ratnākaraśānti. I wonder what your thoughts are on this.
I mean, it's an interesting idea. As I've told you, people tend to kind of transpose names a lot. So I think I've heard the names of a couple different masters down there. Most recently, I'm familiar with Kalu Rinpoche saying something like this.
The previous Kalu?
Yeah, the previous Kalu Rinpoche. Yeah, going to Swayambhu and being like, oh, he's still there. Wow, cool. Somebody knows that story. If Hubert de Clare were alive, we could ask him. But Śāntika means the Kejikpa, the instantaneous one. There may be some just like sound similarities, but Ratnākaraśānti means peaceful jewel ocean, Rangjung Shiwa, or like the ocean as a sort of the repository of treasures. But the people who translated Ratnākaraśānti, at least one of his students, one of his direct disciples, was Newar. Interestingly, he was a student of when Marpa came to Swayambhu, he spoke to Newar named Shantibhadra, and Shantibhadra was the one who said, you should go to Vikramasila, you should study with Ratnākaraśānti. I'm just getting my names all mixed up. Please have some patience here. It wasn't Marpa, it was Drok Milosawa.
Okay.
Yeah, so certainly Ratnākaraśānti had at least one or two disciples, direct disciples who were Newar,
in Nepal,
and his views were so important, and Vikramasila was such a sort of thriving place at the time. It would make sense that his view would have some kind of lasting impact here. And likewise, Ratnākaraśānti, as I said, his biggest tantric commentaries are in Goya Samaja and Hevajra. Hevajra, of course, the tradition went from Bengal up into Nepal, and then from Nepal into Tibet. But the idea that he was such an authority figure who was commenting on a tantra that's quite central to Newari practice, all of the pieces fit together. It's speculation, but it's a reasonable speculation. Yeah.
Is there anything else you would like to add?
Only that I wish I hadn't messed up so many names today. I promise I'm usually a little bit sharper. But I commend you on kind of you're sort of pushing the range of my knowledge in this stuff, and it's great. It's
I
great.
appreciate it. I'm very
course.
happy I can
Yeah.
somehow take a little bit out of your
Yeah.
knowledge base.
And I mean, I guess nobody would say, I don't think anybody would say, oh, I'm a follower of Ratnākaraśānti, but he's certainly influenced my own practice. And I talked to my Tsawé Lama quite often about Ratnākaraśānti, and we both agree that he's very, very profound, and that even if we wouldn't say, oh, his view is the right view, his view is very, very helpful, and sort of interestingly consistent with things like Dzogchen and Mahamudra, but though not the same. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much.
Of course, please. If comments, correct me. Maybe I'll go back and write the names that I meant to say.
No, you're good.
Thank you for correcting me with Dharmapala. And I've been thinking about Keiju Ngorsang Gyatso's Kala Chakra lately because of it. So I just got him messed up with Ngorchen Kungasangpo. But
maybe in the future we can talk a little bit about Kala Chakra also.
Sure.
Yeah, later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great.
Sure. Great.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
No, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. So that's it for now. I'll add some timestamps for people who want to look at particular topics. And yeah, thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, I hope my English was clear. I hope it wasn't. Sometimes I talk a little bit fast and stuff, but no, it's fun. And you did. I do commend you. You did. You talked about a very wide range of things. I haven't looked at this. Some of this stuff I haven't looked at in so long that it was like, oh God, what did it say? Like, oh right.
I just feel like it's my chance to talk to an expert, so I have to.
Sure.
I had to take the chance,
Yeah. And if it was more time or a different setting, I would just open up my computer. But then we would just kind of go down that rabbit hole.
No, it's okay.
People want to see you and I staring at my screen.
It's good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem.